you.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the invite. We're all so happy to be here. So yeah, I work for Canadian Science Publishing, and we're a not-for-profit publisher of 22 science journals in Canada. Three of them are agriculture journals. So we have the Canadian Journal of Animal Science, the Canadian Journal of Plant Science, and the Canadian Journal of Soil Science. And my role is to coordinate. Each of the journals is supported by a volunteer board of editors, and my role is to work with those editors in developing content for the journal to ensure the research we're publishing is serving the scientific communities and the agriculture communities, and then also to do various kinds of community outreach too. So a really rewarding and interesting role. I'm very pleased today to be speaking with two of our editors who are with the Canadian Journal of Plant Science. So we have Dr. Anna Badea and Dr. Leo Galindo-Gonzalez. And just to mention too that before we move into our questions, if you'd like to put Q&A in the chat, you're welcome to. And we will reserve some time for questions and answers at the end too as well. So welcome. So we may be joined by one more panelist who's a little bit late, but in the meantime, we will get started with our questions. So I will start by asking each panelist to introduce themselves, say a little bit about where you're from, and in brief, where your research areas are. So we'll start with Dr. Badea.
Good morning or good afternoon, depends where our listeners are. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer and to applaud them for organizing such webinars. I wish I would have had the possibility when I was back doing my PhD. It's been a long time since then. I am a research scientist working with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, shortly known as AAFC. I'm based in Brandon, Manitoba, Canada's heart. It was quite cold. Now it's more pleasantly the weather here. My area of expertise is in barley breeding, genetics, genomics work, I also, besides being a research scientist, as Morgan said, I'm volunteering as an associate editor with Canadian Journal Plant and Science, as well as Canadian Journal Plant Pathology. I'm an adjunct professor with two universities and a board member serving as an advisory roles for various professional, national and international committees.
Thank you. And Dr. Galindo-Gonzalez?
Yeah, thanks again for the invitation. And yeah, I'm also very happy to be here sharing some of the experiences that we had over our careers. As was mentioned, my name is Leonardo, and I'm a research scientist with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency out of Ottawa. My lab does work mainly on molecular biology and genomics of invasive plants, weeds, seeds of regulatory concern. So we deal with a lot of things that have to do with international trade. So we develop technologies to address specific issues and to make technologies more efficient and more accurate. I'm also an adjunct professor with Carleton University and the University of Alberta. And yeah, no, I think that's about it. I think we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it later on.
Great, all right. So just to kind of start us off, if you think back to, the beginnings of your career and maybe even before that, what brought you into agricultural science? And when I speak to editors, I tend to hear different paths. Some people are, they grow up on farms, so they're actively immersed in the producer side of things. Other people just got interested in it as they moved through their undergraduate careers or even earlier. So Anna, what inspired you to study plant science and wheat breedings?
I think, like you said, Morgan, for me it goes really back when I was a child, and I think I grew up. Not it is hard to define. Maybe I would say these days it would be called a subsistential farm. So my parents, while they had their own professions, they also had a little bit of land around the house, and we had a little bit of animals that we were taking care of. I had lots of freedom as a young child. My daycare and kindergarten was around nature and forestry and land. So this was something that always I had to feel very connected. I need to feel the land, and even today, my joyous morning are really early in the morning when I could go be in the barley field when the dew is on the leaves, and you could really smell in your nose the beautiful smell of land. So that's where it started. I joined, obviously, the University of Agriculture. There, right from the beginning, there was an opportunity to join the Breeding and Genetics Club. I was fortunate enough that was something that was done upon invitation. I was fortunate enough to be invited, and a brand new world opened up for me. So I had the opportunity to do studies, to be involved in doing science and research, and the bug caught with me, and here I am many decades later, enjoying and being able to do. I'm somebody fortunate enough to do exactly what I was trained for. I have a PhD in barley breeding and genetics, and I'm a barley breeder. So I feel very fortunate, and I do hope to be able to pay forward everything that my mentors, my professors instilled into me and give me an opportunity.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I love the way you described the nostalgia of being out on the land, and that's something that you can be in touch with as you're doing field work as well. Yeah, that Leo, what's your story?
What's my story? My story. Okay, so I am originally from Bogota, Colombia. So I'm not from a farm. I'm from Bogota. Bogota is a city of 10 million people. So yeah, no farms in sight. But I did enjoy biology since I was very young. And I was actually, when I did my undergrad, I was an entomologist at heart. So I worked with spiders for 3 years, and then I worked with bees for 2 years while I was doing my undergrad. I still love bugs a lot. I'm always trying to get projects that I can somehow get bugs involved in agriculture, and of course we know that there's a lot of links there with pests and stuff. But anyways, one day a researcher came to Bogota looking for students for doing a project in molecular biology of transposable elements, which is kind of like the retroviruses of plants. And he recruited me, and I went to this other city to do my undergrad thesis on this. And I had to work in transposable elements in common bean, and I also worked a little bit in rice and tropical crops. So I started realizing the importance of food safety. And this institute where I work is called CIAT, is the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, is one of 13 centers around the world that works for food safety. And so I started getting involved in that. I am a molecular biologist at heart, and I ended up working with plants, and I really now see the importance of doing this. After that, I kind of like jumped all over the place, still working with plants. And I went to University of Alberta and worked with trees for a while, spruce trees. And then I worked with flax, and then I worked with wheat and canola. And now I came to Ottawa and work with weeds and invasive plants.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you can see the connections too. I mean, even like with entomology, you have the insect plant interaction. So it's very much like an organic process from moving from one to the other. Yeah, and definitely I've heard from editors too, who just they grew up in cities, but they nonetheless, just got interested in it and just kept pursuing and pursuing. So that's great to see. It's also great to see that we have Dr. Tim McAllister, who's joined us today. Hi, welcome, Tim.
Hi, Morgan. Thanks. Yeah, sorry for that little bit of technical issues on this end.
No worries at all. So maybe we're not too far into things. So maybe if you would like to introduce yourself briefly, and then I will get you to talk a little bit about what inspired you to pursue agricultural science as well. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm Tim McAllister. I'm with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Lethbridge, Alberta. I've been a research scientist with them for close to 30 years or so. Working a lot in microbiology, beef cattle production, food safety, a number of different areas. I guess what inspired me to pursue agricultural research was a big part of it was the practicality of the science that we could apply in agricultural systems. So, to the benefit of food production and food security, which are pretty important things for humanity. So it really had a practical aspect in terms of how we could do studies at the more basic side of research and then scale those up and apply them within agricultural systems to produce food for people in a safe manner and in an efficient way to continue to meet the demands we have for food, both in Canada and beyond.
Yeah, thank you for that. Definitely sounds like safety is a focus for both you and for Leo, who was just talking about that too, in terms of his work on the inspection side. So let's talk a little bit about, each of you serve as journal editors, as either associate editors or Tim, you are the co-editor-in-chief of the Canadian Journal of Animal Science. And I know you have each of you has significant editorial experience. And for those of us in the audience who may not know so much about journal publishing, maybe you could just take us through a little bit about what it is exactly that you do as an editor to ensure that the research we're publishing is of high quality and is of use to the community. So Anna, let's start with you.
Thank you, Morgan, for the question. I'm just to give a little bit of background. I'm an associate editor with the Canadian Journal Plant and Science and the Canadian Journal Plant Pathology, and I think I'm almost approaching 10 years with the Canadian Journal Plant Science, so it's a nice milestone. However, I think I'm a continuous learner, so I'm not claiming to be an expert per se, and there is always room for improvement. And I also think that it is an area where we should stay open-minded. And I think one important thing is also to try to, it is important for an associate editor to be open-minded, and also for an editor. Like while we were called upon bringing our contribution based on our expertise and knowledge, is important to also be able to stay open and to be able to see different or solutions brought to questions and to problems from a different point of view, as long as they are properly done and conducted. Talking about associate editor responsibilities, so for me is to work with the editorial team to make sure that I'm managing in a timely manner the manuscripts that are submitted, to be that bridge between, or link between the authors, reviewers, and editor, and to help or as much as possible also the editorial team. It is an important role because as an associate editor, I'm in charge of finding the reviewers. And reviewer process depends a lot on the quality of the reviewers that are supposed to be experts in the area. I don't want, I don't know, it's a lot, and I don't want to keep going on and on. I'm sure my colleagues, panelists also want to share other things. Maybe I will stop here and then we could continue after Morgan, but whatever you think is best.
Sure. Well, you've given us a good start to it in the sense of your responsibility being to find the reviewers who have the expertise to be able to assess the science. But then as well, when you make that recommendation for acceptance or for rejection, that you're talking a little bit about open-mindedness, and maybe we could come back to that in a little bit if you have an example or if you'd like to talk a little bit more about that. But for now, let's move on to Leo and get your perspective as, you know, a brief summary about what you do as a journal editor, and if you have any other perspectives on it besides Anna's, and we can go from there too.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. I think in general, being an editor of a journal, it's pretty straightforward. You receive some papers which usually are in your area of expertise. So when they look for editors or associate editors, the chief editors and the people working for the journal are looking for people that have some expertise to cover some of the areas of expertise that the journal has. So in this case, the Canadian Journal of Plant Science can have different areas, mainly in agronomy. Other people are going to write papers related to pests, and other people are going to write papers that have to do, for example, with genomics and molecular biology, which is my case. So everything that for the Canadian Journal of Plant Science has something vaguely related to genetics is usually sent my way. Sometimes as an associate editor, you have to first, of course, read the abstract and try to skim through the paper and see if it really fits your area of expertise. If not, you go back to the people in the journal and say, can we find someone else? Can we help with this? Because it might not be my area of expertise. So one of the things that I usually do is just skim through the paper, make sure that the data is solid, some of the results are solid. Sometimes the figures tell you a little bit of that. For sure, reading the abstracts gives you a little bit of perspective on what the authors intended to do and if the language is right. And so a little bit of a scheme. It's personally, it's impossible for me to read every paper that comes in from beginning to end, but doing a good review of the paper is important before even sending it to reviewers, and then finding those reviewers who you think match the area of expertise. One of the things that you find many times is that the journals have pages for editors where you can pick reviewers. Some of them are recommended by authors, and sometimes you look at those, but sometimes you search within colleagues that have that expertise. Sometimes they are more responsive. So one of the problems that we have in journals is that with more and more journals, it's harder and harder to get people to review papers in a timely fashion. And so you have to be strategic in how you look for your reviewers, so you can give a response to the authors in a time that's suitable for everyone, really. And so that's important. And when the reviewers come back with their reviews, it's important that you give a look to the reviews, make sure that the authors are addressing every single thing that the reviewers were asking for. And if they do, if usually the case, but if they don't, you go back to them. Sometimes there's a need for a second round of reviews from the reviewers, depending on how much work is needed on the paper. Or if they definitely do not address the issues that the paper has, sometimes you just have to reject the paper. So there's different decisions that you can take according to the level of the paper and what has been addressed and what hasn't been.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're very much relying on, there's a bit of a balance between your own ability to assess the rigor of the study and the quality of the data and so forth, versus the really fine-grained expertise that you're looking for, and there's reviewers. And it's a process, it's a bit of a give and take. Is that correct? Like,
yep.
In terms of Yeah, balancing. So you're approaching the best decision that you can possibly make, which is pretty much the crux of peer review. It's at the moment it is kind of the best system we've got in a lot of ways for assessing the research. Tim, did you have anything to add about the process? Any thoughts, any experiences that you've had either before or recently that you'd like to share? Oh, you're just on mute.
As the editor, my job is quite similar to what's been described, except for I guess I'm looking at it as soon as the paper arrives at the journal. So as editor, if I feel like it's very poor quality, I have the ability to just reject it outright and return it back to the authors. The reason for that is, there's a tremendous demand on the editorial board in terms of the number of manuscripts they're dealing with and the requests they're getting for reviews. So to try to avoid wasting time of both the authors and our editorial board, we have the ability to make a rejection on manuscripts that appear to be of particular poor quality before they even go to the associate editors. And then at that point, it's if it does look to be of sufficient quality, then it's selecting the right assistant editor to handle that manuscript to make sure that it's aligned with some aspects of their expertise. They don't have to be an absolute expert in that area. Again, they rely on the reviewers that they send it out to provide that high level of expertise in the review. So that's mainly what I do. And then if there's any disagreements that arise between authors and assistant editors and they're needing guidance on how to handle those, then I would get involved as well in that, looking at what the complaint was, possibly get into doing a more in-depth review on the manuscript myself to develop an opinion, and then providing guidance to try to handle that situation in whatever manner is to the best benefit of those that are involved. Typically, in most cases, an editor is going to support their associate editor in the decision that they made originally, because that's why we've got them on the board, because of the expertise that they have. And then I guess it's also looking at making sure that manuscripts are moving along in a timely manner. It's going through the review process. Sometimes associate editors need reminding that there's a manuscript that has been sitting for a while. And then the other component that probably what I enjoy the most of the position is setting the direction for the journal, identifying new topic areas that could be the focus of invited reviews or special topic areas that we can focus on with the journal to try to bring attention to those areas, and also to give opportunities for scientists in Canada and elsewhere to present their work. Some of the more pressing issues that are facing animal science today.
Yeah, and I think there's certainly opportunity to provide that kind of forum, especially being a not-for-profit and focusing. We are international journals. We publish content from around the world, but because we're based in Canada and our core community is Canadian, so we're able to leverage that too. So it's in a way the best of both worlds. I'll add just kind of thinking. Since the three of you've been editors for a fairly long time. Tim, you've been on CJAS as co-editor-in-chief for about 2 years now, I think. But before that, you had various editorial positions. Do you find that the way you approach manuscripts or the assessments that you're making, has it changed over time in terms of your level of confidence or your process or what you're thinking about when you're assessing the manuscripts? Kind of any changes or any maybe lessons that you've had along the way that you might be willing to share? I'll let whoever wants to volunteer for that one can go.
Well, I could say a few words about that. So I think there's been, over time, I think there's been an increase in the level of inappropriate behavior on the part of authors in terms of plagiarism and paper mills and all of those kinds of things. Like that, to me, is, in my experience, is a relatively recent phenomenon. Maybe we didn't detect it before because we didn't have the metrics, but I don't think it was as prominent as it is today. So that's one of the big changes I've seen. And we have a lot of really artificial intelligence systems that are monitoring manuscripts as they're submitted, looking for the degree of commonality in wording and that, and potential plagiarism, and even identifying paper mills and all of those kinds of things that would be very difficult for us to detect that without those IT tools that are able to do those screenings and bring those to our attention. So I think that would be one big area. And then the other area I would say is just the sheer volume of material that's being generated, and the amount of requests that scientists are getting to conduct reviews is just gone through the roof. And that can make it more challenging than it was in the past to find suitable reviewers for papers, because many people are just so overtaxed with those requests that they can't afford the time. Personally, I get asked to review at least one manuscript every day. So you could do nothing but review manuscripts all the time if you said yes to every one of those requests.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a bit of a different approach here in terms of the kinds of problems that you're being asked to look at, as well as just the sheer amount of energy that you have. Anna or Leo, did you have anything to add in terms of no, I mean the landscape in general, but also your own process as an editor or as a reviewer, and how that's changing?
I just maybe may make a comment on what Tim was describing, the amount of material that is requested from journals and from reviewers. I don't know if it's relevant to say, but okay, there's a whole bunch of issues there. One is predatory journals. There's a lot of predatory journals now. And that also comes from how publishing has become increasingly a currency for moving up in the research world. And so many people just trying to publish whatever, or just have fake data to publish, and they're going to find a journal if they don't know how to search. So it's important to know how to search for a reputable journal where they're going to actually perform a peer review. And it's not, publishing papers is not only currency. It's not only putting 10 papers down in your CV to show your research career. And so I just think every day that it's important as researchers, and as the people move through their research careers, they realize that although it's important to publish, every time that you publish or write something, it's important that your data is solid and that you're actually contributing something to science, right? There's a whole bunch of issues related to the amount of information that is being put out there, the fact that there's really no additional reward for reviewers or editors, and there's more journals out there, and there's more needs for more reviewers. So that's another problem, but mainly I think this problem of thinking about publishing like currency has pushed people into also doing some of these things that shouldn't have a place in science now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're touching too on the kind of the ongoing importance of being aware of that during the process of review, in the sense of what makes a contribution, and how do you know that the science is solid? Anna, did you have anything to add to that?
I could add a little bit. I was thinking like, I just want maybe to add a little bit more to what Tim said about rejection and about the quality. Us in the editorial team, we are the gatekeepers, not only for the journal, but we have a responsibility towards the scientific community, ensuring, like Tim said, it's an editor has to be a visionary too, because it's the direction that is needed for that specific area of expertise and domain of science. Also, we have to keep in mind that besides the scientific community, these scientific papers are also read by policymakers, by funders. So it's a lot of responsibility that sits on our shoulders. Also, I would like maybe to say that journals do not necessarily have at purpose, or the editorial teams rejecting the papers. We do not have a set numbers. This month we have to not accept or reject that many papers. No, not. It's, at least this is not our goal. Our goal and our role is to help authors, to guide them. As an associate editor, for example, I have to make sure that all the review, all the feedback that is received from the reviewer, sometimes is longer, and then it needs to be channeled in a way. We deal also with, I think empathy is a good word to say, because it's hard to deliver a negative message, but people also need to know where it's coming from. So writing a letter with constructive criticism and putting everything together could make a difference sometimes between a good manuscript to a very good manuscript. So enhancing the quality of the research that is there, it's also us that we could help with that by guiding and by providing the right feedback to the authors. So just some thoughts in there.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I recently had an opportunity to speak to a group of students about preparing their first paper for publication. And that was one of the concerns that came up constantly, is the fact that some of them had already started to publish their first works and found, it's a little bit hard to take some of the criticism that can come from reviewers. There were also concerns in certain contexts about possible biases, whether that's something that is coming up or isn't. It was something that definitely was at the forefront of their minds. So the fact that you are putting in the time to explain comprehensively why you've reached the assessment that you did, and to give some advice as to what you can do to improve the manuscript, is really really brilliant to see, for sure. Definitely. I think maybe we will talk a little bit more in terms of applications. This should be obvious why peer review and why having correct and rigorous science is important, not only to the scientific community, but also to the agricultural industry. I was wondering if any of you had examples of papers that did really make an impact on how producers or how agronomists are practicing, or if, vice versa, if you're aware of papers that were perhaps not as good as they could have been, and the detrimental impact that they had. If anyone had examples regarding that, or if you'd like to talk about it more broadly.
Well, I think there's been a number of papers that have been published, like in our field, would be in the areas of a lot of products like probiotics or plant bioactives, or compounds that have been explored by industry, quite often commercial sector, for their potential to cause favorable alterations in whatever microbiome you are talking about. I think that includes the soil microbiome, the animal microbiome. There's a lot of work going on in that area. Typically, the individuals that develop those products have much broader and more favorable claims to what they're trying to sell than what you would see when you look at research papers where that's been examined in detail in a research setting with the proper controls and that. So I think the science does as much of service to the industry of identifying things that don't have the capabilities that some people are proposing that they have, as it does identifying those technologies that can have a benefit to the industry. That, if you publish a scientific paper, it really doesn't matter whether the results are positive or negative, as long as the experimental design is correct, the rationale and hypothesis for the experiment is correct, and you have sufficient statistical power and what it is to try to answer the question that you're proposing. Then at that point, information like that can be published makes a contribution to the agricultural society, regardless of whether it's positive or negative.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that too, because we often have authors who assume that publishing positive results is the only way to go. Whereas I work with other editors who actually would prefer to publish more negative results, because it then tells the scientific community that you don't need to go through this area of study because it's already been done, right? And then you get a resource that is actually quite useful. But people tend to want to publish the positive results more because it's a little bit more exciting.
Yeah, and that, those results then have implications for regulatory as well, and the types of claims that are realistic for those products as well, which can become part of the label of the product if it does reach the commercializable state.
Definitely. Anna or Leo, did you have any examples of practicality, applicability of peer review that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as Tim was speaking from his area of expertise, I think working in plants and now working also in the regulatory context and working in weeds, there's hot topics around which you see publications come up. And so, I mean, for now a number of years, it's everything about herbicides, right? That being from the molecular standpoint, from chemistry. And so you can always publish a paper. What can be impactful in terms of practicality is a novel chemical that's going to control from a different group of herbicide-resistant weeds or plants. And so that's, if it's novel and can be applied also to crops that are key to the national economy, then it's going to be something that's going to be picked up. Of course, the science, again, has to be solid, and it has to be transferable, right? So the knowledge transfer part there is really important. That being said, I think because of how economy worldwide has been changing more and more, we only look for things and we only fund things in research that have direct applicability. That has many reasons, and we could get into the politics of that, but that's not the purpose of this talk here. But I still think that basic biology is also important, because without the basic biology, if you don't understand how an organism works, you may end up getting the wrong result or the wrong response to what you're trying to find out, right? So I give you an example of that. We work, one of the plants that we work with are parasitic plants, genus Cuscura. And these plants, most of the people that do identification of plants, they do barcoding of chloroplasts. And so if you don't know the biology of this plant, you would go and try to find barcodes in the chloroplast, but most of these plants don't have chloroplasts, or the chloroplasts have lost most of their genome. So if you don't do that basic research to understand what this plant has, you're going to move on and try to search and invest a lot of money and time in researching something that you're not going to find.
Yeah, you've definitely struck at kind of the core of the issue, right? In terms of it's important to have that publicly funded support for research, but then at the same time, you have these currents and these influences from the commercial sector as well, from the public side of things, that are just influencing that. And that's just kind of a balance that you have to give there. Anna, did you have anything to add before we move on to questions here?
Maybe just a little bit to cover some of the manuscripts that I handle, which are cultivar description, for example. And I think those are important, and because they have an applicability. Is the genetic part what goes into our fields. And I think having proper description and not making false claims is very important. And I think it is important also to highlight something that sometimes is forgotten, that the amount of years and research that goes into being able to do a cultivar description once a cultivar or a variety is registered. I think this is very important. It's also important, like it was also mentioned about the fact that some of the funding to be acknowledged and so on and so forth. So there are very important things that need to be taken into account. It also, I think it's important, and I'm happy to see that more and more abstracts in plain language are also available, which I think it's very important, because not all the audience, like we were talking about the research community, and definitely those are the main audience for our journal and for the manuscripts that are published. There are also like other people, like we mentioned, like even a team mentioned about regulators, and it's important that without diminishing the science, we are encouraging more and more the authors to find a language that is understood by many others. I'm also a very visual person, and I think having those infographics or visual abstracts, I think it's very important. So just that, I think I will stop here.
Yeah, really helpful in your speaking to the knowledge translation portion that the research is doing, which with these two journals, especially the Canadian Journal of Plant Science and Canadian Journal of Animal Science, we do see that direct translation often. So that's great. So we have a few questions that have come up in the chat. So I will move through these. The first one from Kenneth Anku is, are the tactics of salami slicing a major concern during the review process? So for those of you who don't know what salami slicing is, it's basically when you have a study and the researcher has opted to essentially cut it up into little chunks and to publish each of those chunks, whereas they may be more beneficial or more, accurately put in a single paper. So it's an attempt, again, to address that publish or perish imperative that you see the scientists have the pressure under. I can speak to this from the publisher side. We have a integrity and ethics team that regularly does searching for similar papers, so that if we see a paper that is very similar to one that's been submitted, or even possibly one that's been published in one of our journals, then we will take steps to investigate it and possibly work with the editors to have it retracted. We try to avoid that as much as possible. Maybe for those of you, Tim, Anna, Leo, how are you keeping this in mind as you move through your assessment processes?
Well, I kind of just see it as part of the normal process of reviewing the papers. So we are seeing, I think, in increasingly systems types papers where there may be an animal component, there may be a manure component, there may be a crop component, there may be a soil component. That kind of thing is probably unrealistic to put together into a single paper in many cases. So if they're dividing it up, sometimes you'll see paper one, paper two, they'll be published one right after the other, and they're connected that way. It really gets down to whether there's a significant body work within the manuscript that's being presented on its own. Is it scientifically sound? And does it make sense for it to be published separately with a reference to a link to another manuscript that's in a related area as being part of that overall publishing effort? So I think it's very much on a case-by-case basis. The other area that would probably influence that is the genomics work that's going on, which can generate huge amounts of data, which can also be challenging, if you're looking at production or physiological responses and whatever aspect it is that you're measuring, and then simultaneously making detailed genomics work maybe at a more basic level, that may be too much data to put into a single paper as well. So it's really a case by case judgment, and we rely on our associate editors and that to make that decision.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Just for the sake of time, we'll move on to the next question. This is from Grace Iwa. I completed my master's research but never got around to publishing it. Is there a timeline when it became too late to publish? What do you think? Anyone want to take that one on?
I could try to take it, unless Leo, would you? I saw Leo, sorry.
Go
Go ahead, please. No.
Go ahead.
So I just want to take some of the things out. I will speak from the associate editor point of view, is also to look at the novelty and how well aligns the information with what is known. Yes, so duplication is not desired. So 10 years, it could be. It depends. So because what also reviewers have to have a good understanding of what is current and what is needed and is worth publishing. If those findings maybe could be brought in a different way. There are many, like we talk here, mainly we focus on manuscripts, but could be letters to the editor, could be other ways if there is still relevant information there, and the science that was found 10 years ago is still relevant. There is value, and like while we discuss, it doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, is good information, and we have the responsibility as scientists to bring it and to share it with our colleagues. This is something that sometimes I say I enjoy going to symposia, but I also love to participate in workshops. Why? Because colleagues are less afraid to show only the shiny things. They will say, oh, I've tried this and I tried that and didn't work. So you get a little bit of more feedback. And the same, of course, publishing is important and is the last step in the work of a scientist for a specific study. But I think it's our obligation to also show what didn't work or why it didn't work. So I think it is do your research, see what is the status. If I would be to give an advice, I would say inform yourself what is the current status, how relevant are the findings that you found 10 years ago, and if there is still value, then you could also send and consult with an editor and see if the value is still there and what could be done to share that with the community.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anna. And you're speaking as well to the need to kind of immerse yourself as a researcher in different forms of scientific communication. So sometimes, to read in your field if you have time, if you're a working scientist, or else, to participate in different forums and workshops and discussions as part of the complete ecosystem. As someone with a farming background, we usually find peer-reviewed journal articles too scientific. What are you doing to make sure most of the research being done by researchers translates into useful information for the farmers? Again, I'll just add a comment is that we do regularly get coverage for journal articles. Canadian Journal of Plant Science often is covered by a blog called The Canadian Agronomist that makes plain language summaries of our agronomy work available for farmers, and that's really successful. We also do the same thing in sending out articles of research to different publications among the Animal Science Journal as well too. And I know you participate often in different knowledge translation activities as well, and this is one of them. So if anyone would like to speak to that, please do.
Yeah, I think I do agree with the person who made the question. I think, unfortunately, just because of the way that scientific journals have been done and have been publishing information historically, they have a target population which is within the scientific environment and people, peers that many times do the same things. That being said, I think that's part of the reason why sometimes we have a gap between a scientist or the academic world and other people that work more into the real world, the farmers, the people who actually deal with the land, indigenous communities and populations too. And so I think eventually we're going to have to get to a point where at least those plain summary plain language summaries that are in the papers can be a little more detailed for people outside. So there's going to be some journal that's going to come up with the authors that submit a paper are going to have to do a more extensive summary so we can reach those audiences. I also agree with you, Morgan, that there's ways that by which we can reach people. There's extension activities for each one of the research institutes that we work for. There's web pages. If you go, for example, to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, you will find blogs that talk about the research that is done in plain language too. And I'm pretty sure the AAFC has many things similar. I've seen many of the things that AAFC does in terms of reaching the audience through channels like Facebook and LinkedIn. We also do that a lot, trying to put like short summaries of what people are doing. And there's also more of magazines and journals and websites that are directed to translate that research through communicators that understand the science and can translate it into a more plain language for everyone to understand. I used to work for, not work, but I volunteer. We had, for 20 years, we did science communication through blogs and journals, newspaper journals, for the larger audience. I did it in Spanish, but basically we tried to translate the science, the technical science, into a more plain language so people could understand what they were doing in terms of the hot topics, vaccines, anything else related to science. So there's those channels, but I do at the end, I do hope that eventually we get to make a better bridge with the general audience. Because that benefits everyone, really.
Yeah, and I think in many ways it comes down to time, right? As well as because it's work, right? It's extra work for everybody
Yeah,
to
for
do
sure.
that translation, and yet it's so necessary. Yeah. From your experience, what are some key mistakes you've seen early career researchers make when submitting a manuscript for publication? How do I choose the right journal to submit my research to? Are there specific journals that are better for early career researchers? So there are three questions there. So let's tackle maybe the first one, because we have the editors here who see papers from early career researchers. What are some key mistakes that you have seen early career researchers make in your experience?
Well, probably there's a number. Would be a lot of it just has to do with, I guess, the integrity of the paper, how it comes across, in terms of it can be all the way down to the language and the ability to interpret what's being said in the paper itself, the presentation of the results, things like, are the units correct in the tables? Is there mistakes in the units? Is the proper statistical procedures employed? Are they reporting error terms correctly in the tables? So when you start to see, issues with any one of those components, it raises red flags that there may be other things wrong with the manuscript as well. So it really comes down to an overall attention to detail after you've got the proper experimental design. If you don't have the right experimental design to address the hypothesis you're proposing, that's going to cause a big problem right from the get-go, and will be difficult to publish. But some of those other sort of housekeeping things that you typically check for, that if they don't look like they're in order, then one begins to wonder whether the data was properly handled, what other errors were made in the analysis or presentation. So that can just lead to an overall poor evaluation of the paper. So really paying attention to detail, working with your author team to make sure. Quite often papers now have expertise or input coming from a number of different individuals that are contributing to that manuscript. Make sure that they are making their contribution and have properly reviewed the components of the paper that they've contributed as well, to try to just generate as high quality product so that it leaves a good first impression when the AEs and the various reviewers receive the paper for review.
Sure. And since this is a bit of an expansive topic, did either Anna or Leo have anything to add to that in terms of what you see tends to come out of early career authored papers?
For me, I would say one of the things that I see is sometimes the structure, the flow, and the language are still not there. Like there's certain level of technicality that you require so that the paper can be reviewed. And sometimes early researchers are very colloquial in the way that they write their papers. And so I think, adding to everything that Tim said that I agree with, I think the flow, the structure, and the language itself, that also depends on your field and on your discipline, but I think I see a lot of mistakes there.
One of the tricks I use with my students is just to tell them to, whatever they've written, just read it out loud and pretend you were sitting on the other side of the table. And if you read it out loud, ask yourself then, could that person have understood what I just said? And if the answer is no, then you got to go back and make some revisions, because if you read it out loud and you think the individual that you would be reading to that wouldn't have an understanding of what you were trying to say, then it needs to be revised.
Yeah, exactly. The reading out loud trick is a good one because you get so immersed in what you're doing that things that you think are obvious are actually not obvious at all. Yeah.
Talking about obvious, I think one thing I would say, this is why the journals have guidelines for authors. So trying, when you design your paper, trying to follow the guidelines that are provided there and make sure that the right units and the right image and the right way statistical are done, and so on and so forth. I think that it's very important. And for that, you don't have to be a senior scientist. Even an early career scientist could read the guidelines and follow that. Having a proper letter to the editor where describe anything that could be potentially controversial also helps a lot. So making the time and to prepare it, and like Tim said, having maybe even sometimes somebody outside of the group that you are working with reading it and giving you feedback, that always helps. I know everybody is running out of time and I know everybody is in a rush, but like as in anything, like when most of us, we have a mentor and maybe the mentor might not mind, or your former PhD supervisor or your former postdoc supervisor might not mind to help you read and give constructive criticism and feedback to help improve. That helps. It's so doing planning and going through everything that is a requirement from the journal. I think it's very important, and that everything is on the website. It should just one need to go through and read it and follow it accordingly.
So we are at time here. So maybe I'll just apologize to those of you whose questions I didn't get to answer. And, you know, we're, Temideo, if you want to forward them along, I'm happy to gather answers that you can share with the members. But maybe we'll just wrap up with one question that is, I thought was particularly pertinent because it's related to industry and academia and bridging those two worlds. Is scientific publishing only limited to academia and researchers? What advice do you have for someone working in the industry and still interested in scientific publishing?
There's no limitation to publishing from the industry, or whether you've got a master's, a PhD, or a BSc, or even a degree. Like it all comes down to the assessment of the quality of the science that's presented, and whether it meets the criteria that we assess science with the associate editors and that. Now, that being said, if you haven't had the education or the background in the area you're attempting to do science in, it's going to be much more difficult than if you had that education, probably. Not that it's impossible, but probably more challenging. So there are papers that have been published with just industry representation. Many of the large companies have their own research divisions, and they will publish scientific papers directly themselves. One of the challenges, though, in industry is that if you look at the infrastructure that's required for doing research, quite often it's pretty extensive, and it can be difficult for them to have the capital to invest in putting in the research infrastructure that it takes to do those kinds of studies if you're a relatively mid to small sized organization. And they will often then make linkages either with other government research organizations or with academic institutions to undertake that research. But then their name will appear on the manuscript as well. That's always handled by just a conflict of interest statement. If they're part of the company that's done the work, then they declare that as on the manuscript in the conflict of interest statement itself.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Definitely good and comprehensive answer. And we do regularly publish contributions from academic industry collaborations and industry first authors on a regular basis. So it's definitely something we do. Okay, so thank you so much to everybody for coming out on a Saturday. I will ask Anna, Leo, Tim, is there anything you would like to, any thoughts that are coming to mind that you'd like to share as a parting gift?
Yeah, I would say that from just looking back at my career from the perspective of the different stages that I went through, my main recommendation for students nowadays is learn to communicate science and learn to write it, because that's key to anything that you will do in research. There's very few people in research that will not face a situation where they have to communicate science, that being written or that being spoken or through different communication channels. And that's important. And I know universities have been putting a lot of extra work now in providing with courses for students that have to do with communication in science, because pretty much before, at my time when I was growing up and doing my studies, it was pretty much learn yourself. And if you have a good mentor who reviews and gives you advice here and there, that's good, and that's always going to be good. But yeah, put the time into doing that. Write a lot, check your stuff, and then write again, and read books about it, take workshops about it. You can take courses about it. Communication in science is everything. If you want to get funding, you have to know how to convey the message. And I don't want to call it like this, but you're selling. You're selling a proposal. And you can have the greatest idea. If you don't know how to communicate that idea, you're not going to get funded or published.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's really definitely key message for sure. Anna or Tim?
Yeah, I would just say that, like, as a scientist, you have to be prepared to take criticism and rejection, because that's part of being a scientist. So what you need to do is just kind of pick yourself back up, take of those criticisms, what you feel or believe will improve the quality of your work. As much as possible, try to implement those improvements and consider what the reviewers have to say, and then move on. If it's a rejection, you can look at making some of the improvements to the manuscript. There's nothing stopping you from submitting a rejected manuscript to another journal for consideration. If you want to do that, there's a question there about what if you get two different recommendations from two separate reviewers that conflict with each other? Well, then you pick whichever one you think is most beneficial in terms of improving the scientific quality of your manuscript. You will reply why you did that in your response to the back to the associate editor, and why you didn't decide to elect to go with the one that you decided was not as beneficial. So the other thing I would say that it's important to try, if as much as possible. I know we're all busy, but in my experience, I've definitely seen a difference that if you rapidly respond, if you get a manuscript back and you respond as, if the revisions are reasonably accomplished within a week and you are capable of doing that, the sooner you can respond back, the more likelihood there will be of a quick acceptance, because it's fresh in the associate editor's mind. If you look like you've addressed those in an adequate manner, quite often you'll get back an immediate acceptance of the paper, because they've got a lot on their plate too. And it's always difficult if they've got to wait months to get revisions back. The paper's out of their mind. They got to go back. They got to re-review everything they said. It takes them a lot more longer time, and it just irritates them more. And you don't want to irritate the editorial board. Like, you want to try to address their concerns as quickly as possible, as succinctly and as adequately as possible, so that you maximize the likelihood of acceptance of your work.
Thank you, Tim. And Anna?
I think both Tim and Leo summarize things very well. I would just add again, maybe about the criticism. Be prepared. Make sure your ears are open to hear. So I know it's hard sometimes for us to digest. I'm a positive person, and I like to see the positive things. And first of all, I would encourage. I know we have lots of pressure. Sometimes I need to finish my PhD, I need to finish my master, I really need this part of my thesis, and so on and so forth. But also enjoy the journey. Take the time. It's a gift. It's somebody took the time to read, and the moment hold those papers or the computer in their hands and went through your manuscript is the best gratitude that you could get for the work that you put in there. So try to be open-minded to see what is good, take what is good from there, and that will help you either immediately for that manuscript, or could be a lesson that could be with you for the rest of your career. I would like to be positive, and like I said, to think that the reviewers and the associate editors, everything is done ethically, and nobody is there to hurt somebody else. It is just for the benefit. And sometimes it's just like maybe a rejection is just because it was not the right fit for the paper to that journal. It doesn't necessarily has anything with the quality. Like if you heard in the beginning when Tim said, he will scan and look if it's the right fit or not. So try to be open-minded, try to take the criticism and make it something that could improve yourself as a person and as a writer and for your future career.
All right. Thank you so much again to the panelists for participating, and for everybody for coming out and asking such great questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Look forward to receiving your papers.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.